Supreme Court has agreed to review Colorado's landmark ruling against Donald Trump. It has found the former president can't be on the ballot because of the role that he played in the Capitol attacks. Oral arguments are set to begin February 8th. For more on this, we've reached Joe Moreno. He is a former U.S. federal prosecutor, and he's in Alexandria, Virginia tonight. Good to talk with you, Joe.
Hi, Sarah. Good to be with you.
So let's talk about this Supreme Court deciding that they're going to hear Trump's appeal. What's your reaction to that?
Well, Sarah, I'm sure the last thing the Supreme Court wants to be doing right now is to wading headfirst into the 2024 presidential election. Our Chief Justice, John Roberts, has gone out of his way during his tenure as Chief Justice to avoid politically fraught cases. And what is more fraught with politics than, of course, something like this? But I think once states started reaching opposing decisions about how to apply the 14th Amendment to a presidential candidate, specifically Donald Trump, I think it left the Supreme Court no choice but to step in to say, okay, how does this 14th Amendment apply? Does it apply in this case? And therefore, how do we get to a uniform standard so we don't have 50 states reaching 50 different decisions?
Can you help us understand the crux of what it is they're trying to decide? The base of this is insurrection and whether or not a president, a U.S. president, can be found guilty of it?
More or less. It's basically what they call the disqualification clause in the 14th Amendment. It was enacted after the Civil War about 150 years ago. It has never been used at the presidential level. And while the language in the Constitution appears straightforward, the fact is there's a lot of questions that have to work out, starting with, does it even apply to the office of the presidency, which different courts have found different outcomes in answering that question. Then, of course, it's what actually it constitutes insurrection. How do you define that term? It does not appear in the Constitution. Does it require a criminal conviction, or simply can a Secretary of State, for example, just determine someone is an insurrectionist? So there's a number of different really issues here that courts have to grapple with. And in part of the amendment, to even make it even more complicated, it says that the power to enforce it resides with Congress. So there's an argument that states have actually no role in implementing the 14th Amendment and that it resides solely with Congress. Congress, on its part, has not made clear how to execute the 14th Amendment. So frankly, in non-legal terms, it's a big mess.
Yeah, so many unknowns based on what you're saying here. If the court were to decide in Trump's favor, then what happens?
Well, then it's business as usual. So then Donald Trump, most likely, based on the polls, will be the Republican nominee for president. He most likely will face Joe Biden, who has indicated he plans to run for re-election. And effectively, we will have a rematch of 2020 next November, where you have Joe Biden defending the first term of his presidency. And based on what his first campaign speech was this afternoon, coming out swinging, saying that Donald Trump is basically an existential threat to the United States, and that if he's reelected, will have serious damage done to our democracy. So it's definitely going to be a political basically a hot fight, no matter which way this goes.
Well, I was going to say, what does happen, though, if the court rules against Donald Trump in this appeal?
Well, then you're bound to have a patchwork of states, some allowing him on their ballots and some not. So you could have basically millions of people who will not have an option to vote for a Republican candidate in November. That's a really messy situation. It's not one we've ever faced before. And of course, we don't use a popular vote here. We use a state-by-state electoral college vote. So it possibly could be that if Trump is basically disqualified in certain states that he would have lost anyway, it could actually not affect the ultimate outcome. But again, I can't imagine the Supreme Court would allow that to happen. It's just too much diversity. It's too much of a patchwork system. They're going to want to step in and say, look, it has to be uniform. We have to apply this consistently across the country.
I know that time is of the essence here. There is an accelerated timeline for these hearings, but how quickly does this all have to happen? I mean, we're 11 months away from 11 months away from the actual vote.
Well, I mean, even sooner than that are the primary votes. They start in just a few weeks, first in Iowa and then New Hampshire. So this has to be actually done quite quickly because in the next few weeks, states will start finalizing their ballots in the primaries. And so basically, the Supreme Court will have to not only hear arguments, but right after that, come out with a decision. Hopefully, it will be one that's unanimous or near unanimous that people can accept. Because if you get a conservative liberal split, the Supreme Court will again be subject to accusations that it's political, that it favors Republicans over Democrats or vice versa. And therefore, let's hope that does not happen. It's just going to make things that much more volatile this year.
Joe Moreno is a former U.S. federal prosecutor. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Sarah. Have a good night.